The story of the Houthis' rise to power and control over half of Yemen is inextricably linked to the collapse of the Yemeni state. A collapse that was not just political but institutional, social, and deeply rooted in decades of governance failures. While the headlines often point to the Houthis' military gains and Iran's support as the primary drivers of their success, the truth is far more layered and rooted in Yemen's long-standing fragility. The collapse of Yemen's central authority created a vacuum, a deep chasm in leadership, services, and security that enabled a once peripheral Zaidi Shia insurgency to emerge as the most organized and effective political military force in the country. The war did not simply give rise to the Houthis. It exposed the profound vulnerabilities of the Yemeni state and made their ascent not only possible but, in many ways, inevitable. To fully understand how the Houthis came to control such a significant portion of the country, it is essential to trace the roots of Yemen's internal breakdown. For decades, President Ali Abdullah Saleh held the country together through a delicate and often corrupt balancing act of tribal patronage, military favoritism, and political manipulation. His rule was characterized less by strong state institutions than by a network of personal loyalties. This meant that while there was a semblance of state authority on paper, in practice the central government relied on informal agreements with powerful tribes, military units, and regional leaders to enforce its will. When the Arab Spring reached Yemen in 2011, this system was exposed for what it truly was, a brittle house of cards. Saleh's eventual resignation in 2012 was supposed to be the beginning of a democratic transition. The Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC), led by Saudi Arabia, brokered a deal to install Vice President Abdrabbuh Mansour Hadi as interim president. But rather than steering the country toward stability, this arrangement deepened the fractures. Hadi lacked both the political charisma and the tribal networks that had kept Saleh in power. His government was widely perceived as a continuation of the old regime but without the authority or competence to manage a transitioning state. Corruption remained rampant, unemployment soared, and the economy continued its downward spiral. Meanwhile, the ambitious National Dialogue Conference, hailed by international backers as a symbol of democratic hope, floundered in its mission to produce a new constitutional framework acceptable to all factions. It was in this environment of uncertainty and disillusionment that the Houthis made their move. Initially positioning themselves as champions of anti-corruption and equity for northern Yemen's long marginalized Zaidi Shia population, the Houthis gained traction among Yemenis fed up with the status quo. Their rhetoric of resistance and justice appealed to a wide spectrum of the disaffected, not just fellow Zaidis but even some Sunni tribes and disenfranchised urban youth. As the Hadi government faltered, the Houthis' political wing mobilized with increasing confidence. By late 2014, they staged a surprise offensive on the capital, Sana'a, seizing control with startling ease. The fact that the army did little to resist them only underscored how fractured and unmotivated Yemen's national institutions had become. The Houthis' ascent was further enabled by one of the most ironic and consequential realignments in Yemen's modern history, the alliance between the Houthis and their former enemy, ex-President Saleh. Though they had fought bitter wars in the past, political pragmatism brought them together. Saleh, ousted but not powerless, still commanded loyalty among large swaths of the military and elite tribal forces. His alliance with the Houthis gave the insurgency a significant boost in both firepower and legitimacy, allowing them to deepen their hold over northern and western Yemen, including strategic areas such as Amran, Dammar, and the Red Sea port city of Hodeidah. As international alarm grew over the fall of Sana'a and the potential for Iranian influence to grow in the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia led a coalition intervention in 2015 to restore Hadi's government. Operation Decisive Storm began with the aim of rolling back Houthi advances and re-establishing central authority. However, the Saudi-led campaign failed to achieve its goals. Instead of weakening the Houthis, the air campaign inflicted heavy civilian casualties and devastated Yemen's already fragile infrastructure. Hospitals, schools, roads, and sanitation systems were bombed, exacerbating one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. The indiscriminate nature of the strikes and the continued corruption and ineffectiveness of the Hadi government turned many Yemenis against the coalition and further entrenched the Houthis' position. As the war dragged on, Yemen's central authority continued to unravel. In the south, a patchwork of militias, separatist groups, and UAE-backed security forces emerged, each with its own agenda. The Southern Transitional Council, STC, advocating for an independent South Yemen, clashed frequently with Hadi's government, even ousting it from Aden at times. In Hadramaut and Al-Mara, local forces operated autonomously, wary of both the Houthis and the central government. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula AQAP, and, briefly, ISIS, capitalized on the chaos to expand their presence in rural areas. This fragmentation of authority meant that no single government entity could claim to represent all of Yemen, and the Houthis increasingly looked like the only force capable of governing large, contiguous territory. The Houthis leveraged this perception effectively. They created parallel governance structures in Sana'a and other cities under their control. Ministries of health, education, and finance continued to function under Houthi oversight. While often authoritarian and accused of widespread human rights abuses, including the recruitment of child soldiers, suppression of free speech, and persecution of minorities, the Houthis nonetheless maintained a degree of order that the Houthi government and its allies could not match. Their ability to collect taxes, issue identity documents, and enforce law and order allowed them to present themselves not just as a rebel group, but as a legitimate government. Foreign support also played a crucial role. Iran, while denying direct military involvement, provided the Houthis with weapons technology, drone expertise, and political backing. Iranian-made ballistic missile components and sophisticated drone systems were discovered in Houthi arsenals, enabling them to strike deep into Saudi territory and threaten regional oil infrastructure. These capabilities elevated the Houthis from a domestic insurgency to a significant regional actor. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and their Western allies saw in the Houthis not just a Yemeni threat, but an extension of Iranian influence on their southern flank. Meanwhile, peace efforts repeatedly faltered. The United Nations brokered talks in Kuwait, Geneva, and Stockholm produced few lasting results. Trust between the parties remained non-existent, and each side used ceasefires as opportunities to regroup and rearm. The Houthis' control over the capital gave them leverage in negotiations, but their opponents refused to recognize them as legitimate actors, preferring to uphold the fiction of a unified Yemen under the exiled Hadi administration. Today, the Houthis control the most densely populated parts of Yemen, including nearly all of the north and west. They govern an estimated 70 to 80% of the population and dominate the political, social, and economic life in their territories. In contrast, the internationally recognized government remains exiled, divided, and dependent on foreign support. The UN has labeled the conflict the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with millions displaced, malnourished, and lacking access to basic services. Cholera outbreaks, famine conditions, and COVID-19 have ravaged the civilian population. Yet amid this devastation, the Houthis have held on to power. Ultimately, the Houthis' dominance is not solely due to their own strength but is equally the result of their adversaries' weakness and disunity. The collapse of Yemen's central authority created the perfect storm for their rise, a storm of political mismanagement, war fatigue, regional interference, and humanitarian collapse. Without a coherent central government, and with the anti-Houthi coalition plagued by infighting, no force has emerged capable of unseating the Houthis or reuniting the country. As Yemen enters its second decade of war, the dream of a unified, functioning state grows ever more distant, and the Houthis, once seen as a fringe rebellion, remain firmly entrenched as Yemen's de facto rulers.